Given the mostly positive response to my last video on Fooly Cooly, I figured it's worth diving deeper into this weird socialist anime lane that I've carved out for myself, so I thought I'd do that by doing a little examination of societies portrayed in my favorite and sometimes least favorite anime, and I do realize I've consistently talked pretty big about the creator of this show, so I'm just as surprised as you are to be starting this series with the good despite being created by an alleged Japanese imperialist, Attack on Titan. I'm not going to get too deep into the controversies involving the creator because I only know enough to give him the side eye and not a full indictment of his character, so let's move on please. I do want to stress that my last video was written and researched meticulously over the course of several weeks, so in order to avoid establishing a precedent, I will be half-assing this one. Fuck y'all, I'm doing bare minimum. Alright, I'm going to rate Attack on Titan Society real quick. That's the title. The Walled Society, portrayed in the first few seasons of AOT, later revealed to be called Paradis by the citizens of Marley, is just so overrun with terror that it's really difficult to give an objective assessment of quality of life in a controlled setting. From the first episode, all we really know is that allegedly the last known survivors of humanity are living in an enclosure that consists of 3 concentric walls, Wall Sina, Wall Rose, and Wall Maria, that have managed to avoid attack by the Titans for about a century, which is great because if they were to attack, you definitely would not want to live in, oh, they attacked. Okay, well, now that that's happened, let's talk about how this society is structured from an architectural standpoint. So obviously 3 walls means Paradis is broken up into 3 distinct interiors, each with its own populace, and I think it's safe to say, given the abundance of naked, sexless demons walking around outside, it's probably safe to assume that the outer wall is the least desirable place to live, followed by the interior of Wall Rose, and then Sina is just like 24/7 brunch and for Joe Biden as president, and people act like polite drone strikes will somehow save the Middle East. On top of all that, each of the walls also has 4 districts protruding outward at points about 90 degrees apart from each other, and these exist ostensibly to draw Titans toward these densely populated areas so that cannons on top of the walls can focus their fire at 4 points instead of around the entire perimeter of each wall, and what that translates to is that the citizens of Shiganshina and then Trost are entirely fucked when the armored Titan finally smashes through the walls at the start of the story. But for a second, let's say we're still in this brief, peaceful period before the Titans attack. You still got a huge amount of people concentrated on the outer perimeter of a protective structure with the express purpose of inciting attack, basically a promise that when shit goes bad, it's gonna go bad for these people first. More or less making them a sacrifice for the safety of the rest of humanity. I mean, you can go a couple ways with this metaphorically. I didn't want to get into the blatant Holocaust parallels too early on in this video, but you can liken this to the ghettoization of Jewish communities that started in Poland in 1939, or basically redlining, which is the practice of non-investment in communities with unfavorable demographics. In this case, I guess anyone of non-royal blood. That's if you want to put it in a different but equally applicable racial context. And studies have shown that redline communities are disproportionately impacted by the effects of climate change, and given this appears to be a society in the midst of some form of industrialization based on their weaponry, I guess it's safe to say that if Titans didn't get them, carbon emissions eventually would. Essentially, if left to their own devices, Eren and Armin might get to see the sea a little quicker than they thought, you feel me? So I'm gonna go ahead and dock some points for that. Okay, now let's talk about the system of government within the walls. And I say government, but I think I can safely say about pretty much every aspect of life in Paradis that there appear to be no signs of democracy in pretty much any shape or form. For starters, it is a monarchy, which tend to be decided either by some alleged heavenly decree or by violence or some other form of deception, which is exactly what happens, and through means I don't really grasp because I've seen the show exactly once through. The entire interior is run by a shadow government consisting of a puppet king and a religious order that worship the walls themselves and keep secrets regarding them from the people, which feeds into a point that I'll get into in a second. So halfway through writing this, I decided it's going to be a short video, so if any of the following points feel rushed, it's because they are. Here's half my ass. Can you see the frame? Just let me know when the framing is half. Let me know when the framing is half of my ass.
Go to your right a little bit, yeah. That's still that's a lot of ass.
More
yeah, like that.
Clockwise?
And then higher.
Here's half of my ass. Here's half my ass. So the first 3 seasons of Attack on Titan are colored by 2 fundamental problems in government: extreme centralization of power and authoritarianism. Those are the same thing. Okay, well, a lot of my political understanding is rooted in the structure of the workplace, which we don't get to see much of in this show, but we do get to see more immediately in the political structure, the way the government in the walls has the power to do things like cull the population to conserve resources, and later deal out rations to endear themselves to that population without actually addressing their long-term needs. And all the while, it's understood that they, as nobles and royals, are probably not the ones producing the food to be rationed out, and yet they are in control of how that resource is divided. And then eventually there is a long-awaited military coup, which could be used as an opportunity to entirely restructure this super fucked up political system, but no, they take it as an opportunity to put a new person in the exact same position of power. And yes, Historia Rice appears to be a benevolent ruler, but what happens when she dies? What do we do? What, huh? Why are we as people so prone to this belief that it's okay for omnipotent positions of power to exist just because sometimes those people might be nice? Like, sure, Bill Gates might have paid off Nigeria's debt to China at one point, but why does a guy have the power to do that? A guy, that's what means, is one. One guy. Like, what if he decided to just buy Nigeria? What do we do then? They've done too many evil Superman arcs for y'all to keep falling for this bullshit. But I digress. The point I'm building toward here is that for as fucked up as the show's creator might be, the show does paint a vivid picture of what the desire to dominate does to people. From top to bottom, every institution in Attack on Titan is colored by hierarchy and nationalistic rhetoric, which is evident in the national anthem sounding OP of the later seasons, and Eren's rabid hatred for the Titans and manifest destiny attitude about the world outside the walls, which brings me to the final season. Now, I can't speak to the creator's intent here, but the choice to center season 4 in Marley, the source of all the terror of the first 3 seasons, and humanize the people who have been the silent antagonist up until now, perfectly illustrates the way state powers use strategic misinformation to deceive their own citizens. The way we so seamlessly switch POV and realize that in the same way the people of Paradis have no memory before the Titans last attacked, the people of Marley have been fed hateful propaganda about the Eldians that feeds into their desire to use both pure and intelligent Titans to wage war on the Island Devils, which couldn't sound more like the colonial parallel that it is. And it all really makes you wonder if any of this would be happening if they all knew Fritz never planned on attacking Marley to begin with. And that brings me to another point, because this show has so many allusions to violent historical touchstones that I feel like I can squeeze this in without much trouble. The Titans are cops. They're cops. They're sent into a community they don't live in to hunt members of that community who by all metrics have roughly the same social status as they do, but the Titans monopolize violence in the sense that they are just physically overpowering, whereas police are explicitly and implicitly given amnesty by the fascist state they serve. And yes, the entire concept of police is fascist, and I will not explain myself. And specifically, the warriors who take on the 9 Titans have been deliberately led to believe they can somehow honorarily become members of the dominant race, even though they have blood tests and required armbands that say otherwise. And even if they could become Marleyan, they still died 13 years after becoming Titans, so what the f is the point, really? Attack on Titan has a lot of obvious historical parallels with World War II Germany, modern Israel, and the United States, and just generally reflects the historical dynamic wherein life in an economically thriving metropole comes at the expense of their current or former colonial holdings. Just think France and Algeria, or France and Haiti, or France and the Ivory Coast, really just France in a lot of places. And you'll notice the dynamic is such that there is clearly cultural warfare between Marley and Eldia, but the Eldians within Marley fight their own kind with the hope that they will eventually win the respect of their home country. But if you were ever awake in history class, then you saw how that worked out for black people who fought in the American Revolution, or the Civil War, or World War I, or World War II, or Vietnam, or Iraq, or even just a local police force. So you realize that no matter how radicalized Gabby becomes, the Marleyans will always view her as they clearly view Zeke as just another... Do they have racial slurs in the show? I haven't heard any. I guess like devils? But that's just devils. I don't know. So, a couple takeaways to wrap this up. One, Eldians hold all the power in this show. Like, the fact that they are the only ones who can become Titans, but they've essentially had their agency stolen by Marleyan miseducation, deeply reflects what goes on between any modern state power and its working class. With a little organization, there would be no more Jeff Bezos. Willie Tybur. And Jeff Bezos. Two, with Marley and particularly Gabby as the focal point of season 4, the show does a really great job of conveying that all it takes is a shift in perspective for one of two warring powers to seem terroristic in its actions. And throughout the show, we see both Eren and Gabby be radicalized by actions they don't fully understand but that they view as oppressive, while the centralized powers of Marley and Eldia pull all the strings. And ultimately, at least so far, there isn't really a hero to speak of in this story. It reflects a very difficult stance to articulate, but one that needs articulating. That oppressed people have as much potential to become oppressors or benefit from oppression as their oppressors themselves, which is obvious if you look at Israel or even consider the perspective of an African American versus someone in Africa. It's a point a lot of libertarian socialists make, that the path to freedom is not in the desire for power, but in participatory dialogical action by oppressed people who can over time render the oppressor powerless over them, rather than restarting that same cycle. Which means, as much as it deeply pains me to say it, Terry Crews was kinda right, but if you've taken any basic math class, you know you gotta show your fucking work, Terry. It's just stupid if you just say it. It's like if you say a thing that's in a book, but you haven't read the book, and you don't know what you don't know what it means. And so you're just shouting down people who are who are fighting for their lives and stuff. Stupid. Okay, so for illustrating that point very well, I gotta give the show a 9 out of 10. But unfortunately, good narrative structure can't save this society from my judgment. So, for being a near one-to-one reflection of all the worst parts of the actual real world, naked monsters notwithstanding, I have to give Attack on Titan Society a negative 11 billion out of 10. I'm Yudoya, and this is Beyond the Bot, ranking anime societies. If you know of another society that needs ranking, just drop it in the comments, and I'll maybe do it when I feel like it. Yo, thank you for watching whatever this turned out to be. I appreciate y'all spending whatever time of day this was watching my bullshit. I just want to give a shout out to our high tier patrons, Half Price, Sugar Joe, Andrew M, Critical225, Kyle, and Eric Tortoropato. Could not have done this without you. I appreciate you and your support. Questions? We got questions from the audience. Favorite pizza in NYC? I don't really have one because I'm kind of, I feel like I don't really get the pizza hype. Like, I've had pizza that was good, but in general, I just don't get the hype over it. There's a place called Crust nearby me it's fine. It's pretty good. Although one time, Evander Holyfield's son told me how dollar slices saved his life when he first moved to New York, and I was like, hey, aren't you rich? You not rich? I thought that was weird. But yeah, I don't know. Pizza hype, I don't get it. Okay.